something's wrong. 80% of every voter in the United States is dissatisfied with government.
Absolutely.
Period. I don't care why. I don't care why they are. The fact is, the fundamental problem is 80% of all Americans are dissatisfied. Therefore, literally, in my opinion, everything in Washington, everything at the state level is probably in need of being replaced.
Definitely.
Hey y'all, welcome to the Texas Forward podcast. Brian sat down with Austin's very own Paul O'Brien. O'Brien is a startup veteran and a seasoned marketer with an early career at Yahoo and HP. From there, Paul led the early growth of startups such as Outright.com, acquired by GoDaddy, Zvents, acquired by eBay's StubHub, and MicroVentures, venture capital. Paul works in venture capital economic development, serving investment in entrepreneurs. With a passion for media innovation and investment, Paul seeded Media Tech Ventures, a media industry venture development. On today's episode, Brian and Paul discuss the mindset of an entrepreneur, including how entrepreneurs might look at today's political landscape and the current American government as a whole as an opportunity for improvement. What makes a city's economy thrive and flourish, why Detroit's economy folded when car manufacturing moved out, social media, AI, and why you don't want the U.S. government regulating it, but things we can do instead. If you want more from the Texas Forward podcast, follow us on X, formerly Twitter, @Forward, that's @FWD_Texas, or on Instagram @Texas_FWD. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.
I'm your host, Brian Lee, here with a bit of a local legend here in the Austin.
Really? That's where we're starting?
Startup community.
Thank you.
Paul O'Brien. Thanks for coming on.
Howdy, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So we got a ton of interesting stuff to get into today with Paul, but curious. So you are, as I mentioned jokingly, but very seriously, you have been a staple of the Austin startup community for quite a long time. You've been heavily involved in the startup community here in Austin. If you go to a meetup for startups, for example, Paul O'Brien is somebody people, you generally are involved in a lot of those incubators and the Founder Institute and many, many others. And what we're doing here with the Forward Party is ultimately a startup, right?
Sure.
There's a huge gap in the market. To political parties that are not delivering. They are failing to deliver for the consumer, the voters, right? And the Forward Party is an innovator who is doing something different. We're a disruptor. That's the role we're playing here. Yeah. So curious to kind of get a sense from you. You're a marketing guy. What do you know about the Forward Party? And how are we doing so far on that? The brand that we're creating, and how familiar are you with what we're doing here?
I know, frankly, little more than what you've just shared, other than the fact that it's loosely aligned with my own values and views. But I know that it's loosely aligned with my own vision and values because the way you just described it, that something is wrong. Yeah. Period. And we have to do something about that because the average voter, the average citizen, even the average immigrant to the country just generally doesn't agree with the way things are. And I tend to believe that entrepreneurs in general tend to believe that when something is wrong, it doesn't really matter what it is. There's no reason to debate and discuss the fact that something is wrong. That just gets us lost in the noise that we don't agree and you think something differently than I think. And so you're a terrible person and she's not a terrible person and I'm right because you're wrong. That's a sign that entrepreneurs look for to get involved in simply changing things, just doing something different. And so I appreciate what the Forward Party is doing because all I know about myself is that my views are considered very classically liberal. which doesn't mean liberal, by the way, everyone. Classically liberal. You could say libertarian if you believe in those parties' points of view, but more so just almost fundamental human rights supersede literally anything and everything else. And I strongly believe that the early constitutionalists of this country, the folks who put together the Magna Carta in France, the people who recognize that above all else, our opinions supersede that of government. That's where I come from. And so recognizing that something's wrong with the government, something's wrong in Washington, something's wrong with Texas, something's wrong with California, we can all agree that, yes, that's true. Therefore, let's do something about it. And the question then is, what do we do about it? And I align with parties like Forward or frankly Tea Party or like I said, the libertarian perspective, because there's simply the groups of people that are trying to figure out what we do instead of the way things are.
Yeah.
How we do things better.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a problem and it needs to be fixed, right? It's not, blaming the other players in the space. This is an opportunity.
Right.
This is a problem that's not being addressed, right?
And in the startup space, I loved the way you characterized it, because that's in fact what we teach founders in communicating and conveying what it is that they're working on in order to get others excited about their opportunity. And it's that if you listen to most people in business, or you listen to companies, you listen to business owners and sole proprietors, most people tend to communicate what they're working on by communicating the solution. This is what I do. This is what we do. We do it better than everybody else. You should do business with us because we're better at it.
Yeah.
That's a typical way of communicating. And it's neat how you can correlate that style of communication to the way most politicians communicate. I'm going to fix this. Mm-hmm. I have a better way. We need to put in place this policy or this regulation. They provide the solution.
Sure.
The what and the how is how we refer to it. And what was neat in the way you shared what I just heard about the Forward Party is that you actually started with the why, which is what we teach founders. Start with the why, and then give me a sense of the who, not just who's involved, but for whom. Mm-hmm. The why. Something's wrong. 80% of every voter in the United States is dissatisfied with government.
Absolutely.
Period. I don't care why. I don't care why they are. The fact is, the fundamental problem is 80% of all Americans are dissatisfied. Therefore, literally, in my opinion, everything in Washington, everything at the state level is probably in need of being replaced.
Definitely. Fair assessment, I would say. Sure.
I don't know if it's fair, but it's an observation that I think, like I said, most people can relate to. Just this sense that something is wrong, whether or not it's the way you wish things were the way they used to be, or you want them to be the way they could be.
Yeah. Something
is wrong, and both of those opinions are very, very valid. We can work together to change that.
Absolutely. So, Paul, tell us more about you. So you're involved in so many different things. I mean, I was, stalking your LinkedIn before this.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's a nice profile.
It's nice to have stalkers.
Yeah, definitely. But so you're involved in the media tech space. You're involved in incubators. You work with startups. Yep. Tell us and our listeners a little bit more about you, your background, and generally what you do.
Sure. I fell in love with Texas about 14 years ago. I've been here for about 14 years. And frankly, I fell in love with Texas because someone then said the neat characteristic, the neat experience that you're going to have with Austin is that you can go to a concert and on one side of you is going to be somebody wearing a suit, a blue shirt and a blue sport coat, and on the other side is going to be somebody in a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and looking very Texan. And then right next to them is going to be somebody in a thong with no shirt on and probably a little high. And none of you will be judgmental of the other.
Yeah.
You'll all be having just a wonderful, wonderful time together. And that resonated with me because I think too, we were talking just a little bit about politics and the startup ecosystem, but that resonated very well with me because my experiences growing up have actually been in and on the extremes of both sides of government and politics. I grew up in Michigan. Michigan, and with a little bit of gray hair, you can tell I'm older than 20. So I grew up when the economy of Michigan was kind of struggling.
Yeah.
And the ideas that the government up there was going to fix that and was going to make Michigan a great place again for employers, and yet companies like Upjohn were moving out of where I grew up, and the auto industry was a mess at that point. And I left Michigan to get away from that and found myself in Arizona, which I'm sure everybody knows is rather opposite politically. And so I got that experience of what it was like to be in Arizona and in Phoenix and go to school at Arizona State University.
Oh, great place to go to school, I'm sure.
A fantastic place to go to school for all the reasons it's known for. And so I taught myself how to build websites because there was something about that university education model. The fact that it takes 4 years, the fact that you have to study all of these things that don't really have any bearing or don't seem to have any meaning with regard to what it is that you're passionate about.
Definitely.
That I found myself teaching myself how to create websites because I was passionate about music, I was passionate about technology, but I didn't know why. Long story short, that got me to Silicon Valley. That got me to California. And so I did spend the better part of my professional career in tech, if you want to call it tech, in the startup scene in California. But obviously by extension that San Francisco, Berkeley, that extreme of people's views and political views. And so when I heard that there was this place called Texas, and then had to discover that we don't actually have saguaro cactuses all over the place, which is, of course, the impression you get of Texas. When I heard that, right, is it actually from here or is it from Arizona?
I'm not sure. We'll have to check on that.
It was appealing. It was appealing to think that we could be in this country again. We could be in the United States again, in a place where we could have different views and we could have different opinions and we could even very vehemently disagree with one another. But that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That we can, though, get along and have a good time together and get work done together. And so when the mortgage crisis took place in 2008, 2009, we just pulled up our bootstraps and said, let's go to Dallas. And obviously we didn't go to Dallas, which is an interesting conversation as well. But,
so you moved here
in Austin for about 13 years.
Okay. So you moved here right around 2008 then?
Yeah, right in the thick of what's this house going to be worth as we sell it here in Los Gatos, California, where I moved from.
Wow.
Indeed, spent about 2 weeks in Dallas because if you think about the economy at that time or Texas at that time, Austin isn't what it is today. And so back then, if you're moving somewhere almost sight unseen, you go where the jobs likely are.
Right.
And then that seemed like Dallas. Which is not to say it wasn't, and it's not to say it's not now, but it seemed like it was Dallas. And Dallas just didn't have the right cultural fit for me.
Sure.
Perhaps as you can tell. So found Austin on a weekend and moved a couple of weeks later and fell in love with it.
Very nice. Yeah, you definitely have the Austin energy. I think it's a good fit.
You got to have the Austin energy in this part of the world. I find that the most attractive cities, and there might be something to that, I find that the most attractive cities everywhere in the world have a very unique culture and characteristic to it. And what makes that appealing to everyone is not just the people who enjoy that culture and characteristic, but the fact that it makes it attractive and appealing for visitors, right? Even for tourists. San Antonio is a beautiful, distinct cultural city. Houston is as well. In this part of the world, of course, New Orleans is known for being a very unique, very different city, and you can see how well known it's because of that. I think Austin benefits from having a lot of that as well.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Austin's benefited economically from that. You know, it's easy to see. I mean, this city has exploded. You look at the skyline. You look at how much it's changed over the last 20 years. Yeah. Probably even since you've been here. So a ton.
Different city.
Yeah. So what drives that, do you think? What drives the prosperity in a city like Austin versus, a city like Detroit? I'm not knocking Detroit. It's kind of coming back, actually.
Yeah.
But cities that are the haves and the have-nots. What makes an Austin where all these jobs are flowing in, and how can other cities replicate that? And what are some of the downsides to something like what's going on in Austin, where the cost of living is skyrocketing and things have really changed?
The cost of living question is a fun one to start with, because in my world, it's actually a bit of a red herring, or it's a bit of a misdirection. And what I mean by that is Manhattan and San Francisco are two of the most expensive places in the world.
Sure.
So it being expensive is a bad thing? No. Affordable is the right word.
Sure.
The question is actually whether or not the jobs and the salaries and the workforce development and the education related to the people that are there support people to be able to afford it.
Yeah.
And by extension of that, not to get on a bit of a horse, but by extension of that, the real challenge when it comes to affordability is actually not property development, but mobility. And can people get around?
Sure.
You can very easily get around Manhattan. You can very easily get around Washington. There's subways and taxis and so forth. Which means what? Which means you can work where it's exceptionally expensive, but then live where it's more affordable. If you can't get around, a place becomes burdensomely expensive, prohibitively expensive.
Sure.
So yeah, Austin is getting more expensive. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a question of why and what we do about it. But to back up a degree from that, the startup ecosystem here has flourished, and can other cities do it? Yes, they can. Actually, my company, GoVentures, does what's called venture development, which is a pretty unique concept. There are maybe 10 other organizations in the world that do what's called venture development, and it's the hybrid of economic development with venture capital. So
okay.
I appreciate that you bring up that word too. The notion is that venture capital and startup ecosystems work completely differently than investing in Wall Street,
sure,
right? Or investing in property. If you want to be a venture capital investor, it's a completely different ballgame. And likewise, the startup ecosystem doesn't work at all like starting new businesses. It's not something the Small Business Administration, really understands, because starting a small business is not that hard. You put together a business plan, maybe you get a loan, you rent a piece of property, and you operate your business the same way that everybody has operated that business, from time immemorial.
Sure.
Startups don't do that. Startups are making something up. And so this ecosystem in which I work, and this ecosystem that Austin has become very known for, is in fact, yes, replicable elsewhere. We can do it with San Antonio. We can do it with El Paso. We can do it with Lampasas. It's appreciating that the development of that ecosystem, that economic development, is not a question of how do we make this appealing for job creators? How do we make this appealing in workforce development? How do we make this appealing for companies? It's instead a question of how do we make this appealing for venture capital investment?
Yeah.
How do we make this an appealing economy for the people who need to take exceptional risks to invest a lot of money in people who are very, very likely to fail by design?
Sure.
Because they're working on completely new things. How on earth do you do that?
How do you
create that ecosystem? Well, so it starts with actually something that's very evident, even evident in Detroit. Your comment about Detroit. Detroit is known as what? It's known as the Motown City. Motown. Not the Motor City, but it's known for Motown. It's music. There's a cultural aspect to Detroit that was unique to the Midwest. And think about Silicon Valley for a second. Silicon Valley, yes, was largely built technology-wise thanks to the military, thanks to the semiconductor, thanks to research in the radar and all of these technologies that then manifested as the computer. But it wasn't unique there. It wasn't uniquely there. The fact is, Silicon Valley also had Haight-Ashbury.
Sure.
Also had Berkeley. Also had some of the biggest revolutions against the Vietnam War. It had this counterculture. And it's that counterculture of the music industry in Detroit, or the way that Berkeley and Haight-Ashbury forced people to change their perspective on things, that enables a city to become entrepreneurial. Why? Because the entrepreneurs take the risks.
Yeah.
And if your culture in your city doesn't appear to be one in which it's celebrated, that people take risks, then the entrepreneurs aren't going to do it.
It doesn't make sense for them. They want to
can't
go.
afford to.
Yeah, right.
Because as an entrepreneur, affordability is a big part of the question. Because as an entrepreneur, affordability actually doesn't mean to me that I can afford my home. It doesn't mean to me that I make $200,000 a year. Entrepreneurs are very, very different people who derive value from society in a different way. And that value we derive from society is that we're able to make a difference.
Yeah.
I am able to start something that will change the world. If I can't do that, I'm just not going to bother.
Right.
I'm not going to bother. Or what's happened with Austin, by the way, or is I'll go somewhere else that I can. That's why Austin has boomed. Because Northern California in general, has increasingly become an ecosystem in which it feels like I can't.
Wow. Yeah.
I can't afford to be an entrepreneur. I can't afford to be as successful. There are too many barriers to entry or burdens to get involved or challenges in the economy that make it difficult for me to start something new. Where else can I do that? Where else should I go? Austin stood up like a beacon about 6-7 years ago and said, this is absolutely the next hotspot for entrepreneurship. And indeed, that's been proven to be the case.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've never heard that angle before, that it's almost the culture of innovation, the culture of, creativity, right? That a city has that attracts innovators.
Well, to be frank, you don't hear it very much because it's a newer idea. It's a newer realization, really only possible thanks to Silicon Valley and thanks to the internet. So appreciate that it was only about 25 years ago that the internet, 25 years ago, right? So when I was a kid, when we were kids, we didn't have any of this stuff. The internet completely changed everything, literally everything. Changed the way healthcare works, changed the way the music business works, changed the way how you watch television, changed the fact that we're not on the radio. We're not on, KXAN radio. We are using iPhones right now in a co-working space, which co-working didn't exist 30 years ago either. Yeah. Right? The internet literally changed everything. And so it was such a substantial impact on society, on culture, the economy, on government, on education, on healthcare, et cetera, that it caused this moment in human history that will forever be known as arguably an enlightenment. Yeah. This point that we can now look back to and go, "Whew, how did that happen? How did that happen?" It's not dissimilar to the massive amount of immigration that came in through Ellis Island.
Sure.
What happens when we allow that, right? What happens when we cause a lot of people to move to New York in particular? Boom, this catalyst that changes the world. What happens with Detroit? What happens when Ford and other folks in the auto industry decide that place in particular is where we're going to build the transportation industry? Boom, you get a completely different way of understanding the economy and the way we work, and that changes society in such drastic ways that we're able to look back on it. And that's my point, that it's a new idea. It's a novel understanding of economic development. We're able to look back on it and go, oh, creating a healthy ecosystem, creating a healthy city or a healthy state in this era is not about workforce development to give people jobs in technology. It's not. Because I can teach you JavaScript in 6 weeks.
Right.
And that JavaScript skill is irrelevant in a year because something else has come along. Right. So how do we teach people to thrive in this economy driven by the internet? It's about teaching people how to and appreciating how to take risks, how to recognize and value change, how to participate in that ecosystem, how to be online so you can learn, how you can communicate, you can connect. And it's only been in the last 10 years that people have started to understand and appreciate that.
So how would a city go about that? I mean, that's definitely resonating with me quite a bit for an individual to, learn those kind of, that mentality, right? That entrepreneurial mentality. But how would a city that just doesn't have this stuff going try to get it going?
It actually gets back to that fundamentals couple of questions that we talked about at the beginning of the show. We teach entrepreneurs that in elementary school. In elementary school, you learned who, what, when, where, why, and how. You're taught that in as a perspective of grammar and language and reading and writing. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. These are the fundamental questions to ask. You actually learn the same questions in a PR, or public relations class. I took one in college, and they do the same thing. The basic questions: who, what, where, why, and how. Now, if you recognize that, you could appreciate, I hope, how that then sort of burns in the back of our brains. Mm-hmm. It's the way we think. And so the next time you go to a meetup or a networking event, notice people talk that way, because it's how we've been trained to think, to talk. If we were to meet for the first time, I'm more likely to say, hi, I'm Paul O'Brien. I'm the CEO of Tech Ventures. I've been in Austin for about 12 years. It's really nice to meet you. Who, what, when, where.
Interesting.
And appreciate that when that happens, by and large, when you're meeting people, you've already forgotten their name.
Yeah.
I don't really care that you're the CEO of, what did you just say?
Yeah.
Right? Because you haven't said anything at all compelling. You haven't told me anything that matters in any way whatsoever. And the people you remember are the people who don't do that. The people who lead with a joke, or lead with a compliment, or they tell you something interesting, or they bring up a very compelling question. And so we teach founders to think the same way, that you have to start with why.
Yeah.
Why the forward party? Why that startup? Why that venture? The city. Why do we not have startups here? Why do we not have entrepreneurship here? The mistake that most cities make is they then think, well, it's because we don't have venture capital.
Sure.
No, venture capital is investment, and that money will go wherever there is opportunity. It will go wherever there's an opportunity to invest in something.
Right.
And so it then draws us back to that first fundamental question. Well, then why aren't we creating the kinds of companies that draw venture capital? Mm-hmm. Why? And that then begs the question of who, right? Who is next? Why? Who is what we teach? Who does that kind of work? Again, they're entrepreneurs. They're not business owners. They're not property developers. They're not politicians. They're entrepreneurs. They're the people who will look at the ecosystem and not care what the problems actually are, because I don't want to get lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do something about it.
Sure.
And so what I noticed when I moved to Austin is a good example of this, and I've now seen it in Houston, I see it in San Antonio a lot, is there are certain people who constantly show up with regard to the startup ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that you want to lean in on first, because those people who constantly show up don't care what the hurdles are. They're still showing up, right? They don't listen to the people who say you can't. What do you mean I can't? Who says I can't? I'm just going to do it.
Right.
Well, it doesn't make any sense, or it's against policy, or the city isn't zoned for that. I don't care.
It's never been done before.
I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah.
You look for those people, because those people who keep showing up aren't hindered by the lack of affordability. They aren't hindered by the people who say you can't, or the people who say no. Why? Who? And then let me touch on this before I let you jump back in, because it's really where the secret sauce comes in. I still haven't explained to you how we're going to fix things. I still haven't communicated what it is that we're going to do. And indeed, right, you didn't do that in telling me about the forward party. Mm. You still didn't say, here's what our policy is. Right. Here's how we're going to do that. You know why? Because I'm not compelled yet. I'm not compelled yet to be interested and agree. So what you do first is you talk about when, and you talk about where. And notice we've sort of naturally done that on the show. It makes it a little bit more interesting. We talked about Detroit in the past, and where, and that enables you to go back to the why. Why did Detroit's auto industry fall apart? Does anybody know? Why did it, put it in the comments if you're doing comments on social media? Why did Detroit's auto industry fall apart? Well, because Japan took over. No. Because Japan's approach to innovation and entrepreneurship and their culture took over.
Right.
And they made it a more attractive place for people to build and produce and sell cars at the time. Why? Because Detroit stopped being innovative. Detroit stopped being. Why is Detroit thriving again? They decided that it made sense to start being creative and innovative again, right? That's what's happened with Detroit. That's what's happened with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley stopped being as creative and revolutionary and controversial. And so people looked at Texas as the next opportunity for that. And I love pointing that out because it's only in, if we were to bring it back to government or politics, it's only in thinking that way, not who, the president, who, and what is the president doing? See how that causes us to get lost in the noise.
Right.
And instead thinking why. Why don't we have affordable health care, for example?
Yeah.
The solution is not the Affordable Care Act. That's a what. And the solution isn't how. Well, we're going to get the government to pay for all of the insurance. That clearly hasn't worked, right? So it's not the what's in the house, it's the why. Why don't we have affordable healthcare? And who can fix that? Well, probably not the government, probably not politicians.
Yeah.
It's healthcare, for crying out loud, right? When you ask the questions in the right way and you start to think like that entrepreneur, sorry, I'm going all over the place, but
No.
yes, a city absolutely can replicate what an Austin has done or what a Silicon Valley did or what Detroit once was. You absolutely can replicate that. You have to appreciate that it's the whys and the whos and the when, the histories, the stories of the past, right? What Austin was is incredibly compelling. It used to be one of the hubs of the United States for the semiconductor industry. Used to be. It's becoming that again. But it used to be. Back in the 90s, much of the semiconductor industry was here as much as it was in Northern California. What happened? Because Austin lost that. It went to Silicon Valley. Austin didn't decide to be creative and entrepreneurial and innovative then. And so all of the semiconductor innovation went to Silicon Valley to become the computing industry. But now Austin's recognized. Be creative, be innovative, take the risks, be entrepreneurial. And so what's happening? It's coming back.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. I mean, I can just think of so many examples of that in terms of, just you see cities that are coming back. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Ohio.
Sure.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, see like Cleveland. Now, I'm in Texas now. We're in Austin now. A city like Cleveland had the same thing, right? And you see these districts downtown where, there's a lot of art, there's a lot of creativity, there's just a lot of, frankly, just attractive things to do in the ecosystem. Yeah. So very interesting. So I want to take this out a little bit to kind of the larger scale, the global scale.
Sure.
So, America is still the leader in innovation. And I think it's tough to argue that we're still the best place to start a business. And maybe you have some thoughts on this, but the best venture capital ecosystem, the best just ecosystem for that innovation. Now, our government's not, we're, as we've touched on, doing a lot of things wrong, and we're declining in a lot of ways as a country on the global stage. How do we remain that, leader on the global stage? And do you see, any other countries competing with us there as far as, being that place that people want to go to start a business and innovate?
Yeah, neat way to talk about it, because a person like me actually doesn't perceive things as competition as much as most people do.
Okay.
In the startup stage of the economy, it's actually a mistake to perceive that we're the best. It's a drastic mistake. It's what creates a passive economy that when you start to think that you're the best, right, you end up bailing out banks and bailing out the auto industry because we just need to keep things the way that they have been. Obviously it's been working and we're the best, and something must have messed with that. Somebody probably stole something from us or screwed with us in some way, and but nobody's just appreciating the fact that no, actually you got passive. You decided you were the best in the world and you thought it would always be like that. And that's not pragmatic and it's not realistic. Look at what Austin has done to California. Look at our startup conversation. When it comes to the same question on a global scale, people like me actually think of a place like China, I notice, in drastically different ways than most people think about China. I know for a fact that China has a culture that encourages copying things.
Yeah.
It's the way the culture is. And I recognize the great value in doing that, right? The United States has a culture of patents and copyrights and IP, and you can't use my idea unless you pay me for it, and you must have stolen that from me. And I understand why that culture of the ecosystem exists, but at the same time, I understand why China's perspective and culture exists. Why would you not take other people's ideas that are really good?
Right.
If you're a different country, if you're the United States, why would you not use the ideas and the innovations of others and other people? And when we started the show, and I said, I'm very much more so just a person who firmly believes in fundamental human rights above all else. I vehemently believe that any entity or organization who prevents our using or doing anything necessary to ensure that everybody thrives is a problem. And so I see what a place like China is doing and think, that's really rather brilliant of them. They should take all of the ideas and technology. They should take. Why would they not? It makes perfect sense for them to use the innovations that have been developed on behalf of their people. Now, that said, hopefully it's evident then that a place like China is absolutely a massive competitive threat, if you want to think about it like a competitor to the United States. It absolutely is. However, again, people like me look at that and think, okay, if that's reality and it's understandable, rather than trying to prevent them from being a competitor, the more important question is, what do we do for ourselves to ensure that we continue to thrive to as great or a greater degree?
Absolutely.
Rather than trying to hinder the rest of the world, or any other state for that matter, the rest of the world or other places, rather than trying to hinder in order to ensure that we're the best, the real question just becomes, how do we ensure we remain healthy, happy, and thriving?
Well,
and that's where I get excited about the notion that what we know as a country is that we're not happy with the way our government is now.
And we're becoming less happy and healthy every day.
So let's do something different. What? I'm not really sure. That's what entrepreneurs do. I don't know what the answer is. I just know something's wrong. And if we don't band together to do something different and figure out what those different things are, we're never going to get there. We're never going to uncover it. We're going to enable other countries to figure it out. And those countries are going to excel beyond us because they're taking the risks and taking the initiative to do things in a better way for their people.
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that I love about just generally what we're doing with the Forward Party and a lot of the conversations I hear and have with people, it's very centered around technology, innovation, this thought process that we've been talking about today.
Sure.
How do we inject that, spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship, frankly, into, our institutions? I mean, because you look at government institutions, just name any of them, let's say the EPA or just any, we're just picking them out of a hat.
Yeah.
They're not known exactly for being leaders, cutting edge, innovative in the way that they think and the way that they do things. In fact, they're known as the opposite: slow to change, slow to adapt, bureaucratic, bloated.
Yep.
How do we change that in your opinion? And, do you see any examples in what you do of, the startup community partnering with public sector in order to achieve some things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's another way that perhaps your audience can consider thinking differently, thinking outside the box. That again, I tend to perceive things rather differently than most people.
Sure.
What do I mean by that? If we're dissatisfied with our governments, with the agencies, I don't really care what their policy is. What I know is they're doing something wrong. I don't really care what the decision is. I don't really care what the policy is. Something's wrong. What do we know is wrong? Well, here's an example that ties it back to innovation. What do we know is wrong? Well, I know for a fact it costs essentially nothing to build a website.
Sure.
Nothing. Everybody who doesn't work in technology, everybody who's got a small business, everybody who works for a company, if you didn't realize this, it costs literally just about zero to create a website. How much does our government put in an RFP, the city or the state, or how much does the government put in an RFP to hire designers and software developers and engineers and so forth to launch a new, frankly, fairly basic in my experience, website to promote something. Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's ridiculous. And my point about how I and people like me think differently is perhaps evident in a very hot topic these days, and that's AI, a different technology, artificial intelligence. I'm sure you've heard about ChatGPT and the like. Notice how what the traditional parties, GOP or Dem, doesn't matter to me. Notice what the White House does. What they do is they attack this stuff. They attack this stuff just in general. Remember when Mark Zuckerberg had to go to Congress and sit in front of Congress for the hearings, in which these esteemed senators who are making decisions about policy said, "So Mr. Zuckerberg, can you explain to me how you make money?" And he, I mean, it was one of the highlights of my life. He says, "Advertising? Like, are you an idiot?" I do mean to be critical of whoever asked that really stupid question.
Oh, yeah.
That these are the people deciding things.
Oh, yeah.
They have to bring the person who largely defined what social media is today in front of a bunch of legislators to just explain how it works. Oh my God. I'm terrified.
Right.
I'm just terrified that what you see the government do, and this is why and when you know we have something we should be concerned about, is they just attack it. Mm-hmm. That AI is going to do what? AI is going to eliminate a bunch of jobs. Oh my God, we have to control this thing. Mm-hmm. We have to control ChatGPT because it's going to replace a bunch of jobs. Or it's going to mislead us, right? Or it's going to allow for deep fakes, or it's going to allow, Russia to inject a whole bunch of misinformation. You know what? Yes, it is. Yes, it absolutely is. Those politicians aren't wrong.
Right.
But they also aren't helping us by just trying to complain about it and make a problem of it and point out that they should control it. Because you know who should not control it? Them. That's ridiculous.
The people who don't know how Facebook makes its money.
That's ridiculous, right? So the role of innovation and the role of technology and the most important thing for literally everyone to understand, no matter what you do professionally or even if you're not a professional, if you're at home with your kids, the most important thing to understand is this fundamental notion that I shared about the internet, which is what? The internet completely changed everything. How? It makes all information freely available. All of it.
Levels the playing field.
Why are we pissed off about the cost of university education? Because you can literally learn everything that Harvard teaches on the internet for free. Why does it still cost so much? Right? That technology does two things. One, it makes all information freely available. We could share it all immediately, everywhere in the world. We could share it all. We get it all available on demand immediately for free. Number one. Number two, it is constantly changing.
Yeah. Constantly.
I have no idea what the news about AI is going to be tomorrow. None. And forget AI, this new, exciting concept. Back up a little bit. I have no idea what the new information or the new development from Facebook. We were talking about Facebook. I don't know what they're going to be doing tomorrow. It's going to completely change. And so what you can't do is control it. You can't regulate it. You can't have politicians sitting 3,000 miles away making decisions about something that just will be different tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It will be. You can't stop it. You can't prevent it. Everybody in the world is making those changes. And so you must have people, you must have society, you must have a culture that embraces change, embraces the risk takers, and recognizes and encourages everyone else to recognize that we can learn things for free. Teach people how to do that. Teach people how to empower themselves to understand the role that they play in this society and this culture, and to understand how to be better citizens, more informed voters, better working professionals, better stay-at-home dads.
Yeah.
Because the information's out there, right? If you feel lost, if you feel like you're struggling, if you feel like we're gonna lose jobs because of this new innovation, the information about how to participate in what's next and even what's now, frankly, is out there. You just gotta raise your hand and participate.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point too. Like something like ChatGPT. I mean, in just the internet in general, how much did the internet change the ability for someone to start a business, for example. You don't have to go to the library and look up books on, XYZ and, P&L statements and all that stuff that you would have to learn and it would take, courses on and years to learn about. You can learn about it in a weekend.
Yep.
You can learn about any topic you want. It levels the playing field. It accelerates everything. Like a chat GPT, for example, it's amazing how it accelerates learning, right? It accelerates, you can type something in there. It can write a contract for you. It can tell you what, automate, how to write a script, how to build a website, right?
Right.
Like it accelerates learning.
But the important point that I'm trying to get across is that it's critical that we make sure your families, your friends, your neighbors all understand that technology is not a solution. It's a change. It's an iteration. Because yes, while this ChatGPT thing can do all of that stuff, if society is not familiar with the fact that it can also be wrong, it can also be misleading, it can also be biased, that if we don't empower everyone to understand that when you are reading a tweet, when you are reading a news article, when you are on Facebook, when you are listening to a podcast, you can fake a podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
These days, you can completely fabricate a person in AI and the voice and the wording. You can completely make up a YouTube video that is completely fabricated and it looks real. If we don't teach people that that's the world in which we live, right? And therefore, you have to do what? You have to take some personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. You have to double check things. You have to talk to people directly. You have to question everything.
Yeah.
And you certainly don't want, in my opinion, you certainly don't want legislators telling you that they're going to save you from it and protect you from it. Because they just can't. It's not possible.
Yeah. I mean, it calls for the general average Joe to just be more educated, more discerning, right? Yes. That's really what it requires. Yes. And there's no amount of legislation that's going to protect someone who isn't, trying to understand this stuff and question things, right?
That, a great example I like to try to drive home, since we brought it up a couple of times, is evident in social media, right? I work in media technology. That's the technology in the media industry. It's in social media. And when you know that we should be concerned about what legislators are doing is when they say things like big tech. Big tech is trying to steal your information. Mm-hmm. Okay? In whatever iteration you've ever heard that concept, I'm sure you all are familiar with what I'm talking about. Big tech is a really bad thing, right? And they're stealing your information. They're going to monetize you. Okay. I want you to appreciate and know that something is misleading about what they're doing. What they are doing in saying that, not big tech. There's a reason a legislator is saying that, and it's because they want voters to enable that legislator to have more control and influence over those companies. Mm-hmm. Because big tech doesn't actually define anything. It's just a derogatory term.
Sure.
So one, they're just using a derogatory term. Two, social media, it's literally in the word, social media, literally in the word, by definition, is not private. And yet you have the government saying social media should be private, right? They're using your data. No. If you're on social media, it's like standing in the middle of Times Square. You are literally as public as you could possibly be when you're on social media.
Right.
So why is the majority of our government at a state level, at a national, why are they telling us it shouldn't be like that? It is like that. That's like saying, no one should know that you're standing in the middle of Manhattan. That's not okay. No one should be able to see you. That's not okay.
Yeah.
Then don't stand there. Don't get on social media, right? That we just need to be educated and remind ourselves that that's the way it is. It's not wrong. It's not bad. The reason Facebook is free is because they use data about people in order to advertise better. Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful, good thing.
Right.
And yet they've tried to turn it into a horrible thing.
Sure. Well, I would like to push back on that, though, because big tech, interesting, and we'll call them big tech. It's the Facebooks of the world, right?
Okay.
So a lot of the algorithms that they use tend to have a tendency to promote a lot of hateful rhetoric, a lot of polarization, and frankly, a lot of really bad things as far as, look at teenage girls who are on social media all the time. Suicides have skyrocketed among teenage girls, and, just a few examples there. They're monetizing things that are not good for society in a way that I liken it to like cigarette companies, right? They're selling a product that is very harmful to society. Their business model is harmful to society. Yeah. What do you make of that? And to me, that's where government, I'm very much against the idea of government controlling it and censoring it and controlling what can and can't be said. Yep. Obviously, we can get into where that goes, but it's not good. But how does the government step in these situations where there's clearly some harm that's being caused on our society from this business model that they have?
So you're implying, or you're suggesting that what was happening before Facebook and what was happening in society before the internet didn't cause the same things to happen, just on a smaller scale. You referred to cigarettes, for example. Mm-hmm. Do we prevent people from smoking or having cigarettes by outlawing them and by completely preventing it from being possible for a people who are free in a society where it's free from making such a thing? Or do we teach people the fact that smoking is going to give you cancer and you're going to die at 50 instead of 80?
Sure.
Right? What we do is we teach people. Facebook's algorithm, social media's algorithms, do they intentionally? Really think about it. What would they have to gain? What would their purpose be in intentionally showing us things that are harmful? Or in fact, does humanity have a problem in the fact that it tends to enjoy and consume things that are harmful?
No, I think that's right.
See, what social media has done is they create algorithms that show people what they want.
Yeah. No, that's true.
So how do we fix it? Do we control social media? How? And how is the important question for everybody to realize? Because Reddit is another big social media company. It's owned out of China. So,
really?
someone tell me what Washington is going to be able to do to force Reddit to only have certain things on it. They can't. They're going to do whatever the heck they want. Same with TikTok, by the way, sort of, for those of you that know TikTok and how that works. But my point is, the internet is a global thing.
Yeah.
That the U.S. and the U.S. government can only control that which is within our country, run by people that are citizens of this country.
Sure.
Canada doesn't care, right? You could start a social media company in Canada, and they could go, well, I don't care what Ted Cruz thinks. I don't care what Nancy Pelosi thinks. Doesn't matter to us. We're not there, right?
Yeah.
That the intent, the effort on behalf of is my previous point. The effort on behalf of our government to demonize companies or demonize technology needs to be seen through a more transparent lens. That they're not actually helping you. They're not actually helping us by merely demonizing technology and companies. Because the fact is, the technology in those companies are doing things that are entirely appropriate and entirely legal. It's society that's a little broken. and in demonizing it, they're pretending. They're misleading you to believe that they're able to fix it. If you just vote for me, if you just donate more money to my party, I will prevent Facebook from doing that.
Yeah.
And it's hogwash. It's not possible. It's hogwash. They're distracting us from the fact that what really needs to happen is better education on behalf of the dangers and how to properly use this stuff. And I think that's alarming too to politicians, because what it means is a more educated populace, a community that communicates better. And that can be a threat to politicians that try to manipulate.
Sure, absolutely. That's very interesting. So thinking about it in terms of almost like you think about smoking, again, they ran campaigns, anti-smoking commercials. That's when I was growing up, you saw those all over the place.
Yep.
think about something like that for social media. But I want to bring up one more point with that, just relative to that example, the smoking example, is we did regulate the way those companies were allowed to advertise, the way that they were allowed to promote their product, right? They had to put the ad on the back of the cigarettes that say, this could cause cancer. Mm-hmm. Should a social media company have Facebook? This is not real. This could be fake information on our platform. Don't take this seriously. Or literally, should something like that be on a Twitter or Facebook?
You may have noticed it already is starting to move that direction and merge that way. The government tried to control what was and what was not allowed on Facebook. That didn't work out very well. Elon Musk bought Twitter, and if you look at what's happening on Twitter, it's X now. Yeah, okay. If you look at what's happening on Twitter now, though, in order to address that idea, whether you like Elon or Twitter is not the point, or X is not the point. In order to address that notion of could or should the government or regulation or policy help teach people the dangers of things? Yes, it's a good idea. But can government do it better, or does society need to do it? Mm-hmm. Right? And my point is that if you look at Twitter in a lot of cases now, X, if you look at X now in a lot of cases, they've added this community standard kind of feedback mechanism where you'll see in a lot of posts, especially political posts or health related posts, you'll see that then there's a set of information that's provided by the community to help expose whether or not something is accurate, whether or not something is misinformation. And so that's a wonderful example that's very interesting to me about how, if enabled to and if empowered to, entrepreneurs will solve the problems. We'll look at something like, misinformation through social media is absolutely a problem.
Yeah.
Give us a chance to fix it, because you can't stop it. You can't stop it, but give us a chance to fix it. We'll figure it out if given the time to do so.
Interesting. Yeah, because it really is. It's human nature, right? You can't change human nature. We like things that are, bad for us sometimes.
We do. Some of it's not even necessarily bad for us. It's just stuff we don't really like.
Yeah. Absolutely. Good stuff. I want to touch on one more kind of, problem that needs to be solved specifically, let's say, and, in the environment that you operate in, the tech world and the kind of venture capital ecosystem. This has been an interesting last couple of years with inflation and with some of the kind of banks that have gone under. It's been kind of a rocky road. So I'm curious, like, your general thoughts on how government policy has impacted our currency and just the markets.
Yeah.
Have we addressed it properly? And just what is your general take on all that?
Yeah, a few good questions. My bit of an economic study always emerges with this kind of topic as a reminder that inflation is caused by the government. Mm-hmm. It's caused by monetary policy, and that too makes inflation a wonderful topic in my mind, because it's another good example of where you'll see the White House or you'll see the government blaming companies and blaming businesses for inflation.
Yeah.
And nobody ever really says, why? Wait, why? Why are you saying that? Because you do realize that automakers will sell cars for whatever they sell for. Mm-hmm. That's not what causes inflation. What causes inflation is the monetary supply. The more money that's supplied, the easier it is for the banks to have the money. The easier it is for the banks to have the money, the more likely they are to put it into the market. The more money that's available in the market, the more money the businesses will want to acquire because more money is freely available.
Sure.
That's what drives up prices. And so, it's happened on more than one occasion. The mortgage crisis. That I referred to 10 years, 13 years ago, let alone, recently again, that our monetary policy has resulted in circumstances that either drive the exceptional cost of things or enable circumstances in which things collapse. And without question, I think the government's approach to or their policy about that kind of thing happening has been wrong, not actually because it happens, but because when it happens, the government does what?
Bails
They
out the big
bails
guys.
it out.
Yeah.
And then they blame the companies. Then they blame the companies with concepts like too big to fail.
Right.
Well, that company was too big to fail. We can't let it fail. No. Wait, you created the circumstances in which something was likely to have a problem or collapse, and then you forgave them by giving them the money to make sure that they didn't fail. So who actually is at fault and responsible here? Not the companies, not the people for using the money or taking the money, frankly, right? There's nothing wrong in that. So it troubles me on one hand. Now, you also asked my perspective or my take on it in my world. The more interesting perspective, I think, is in my world, appreciate that, we all know the economy goes through cycles.
Sure.
And again, to an entrepreneur, we don't really care about the how it happens. We just care about the why it's happening and what we do about it, right? And so when an economy is booming, things are wonderful for the entrepreneur and venture capital class. Why? Because people are buying more things, people are consuming more things, people want solutions to things, people are willing to invest in things because it feels like things are good.
Optimistic about where things are going.
Exactly. The thing to maybe appreciate about the potential that Texas has, and Texas being so entrepreneurial though, is that when you think like an entrepreneur, you appreciate that the other circumstances are also an opportunity. Mm-hmm. That when the economy is bad, people desperately need solutions to things.
Definitely.
People need work. People might want a different job. When things are bad, the startup community looks at the circumstances and says, well, okay, we'll just fix things based on that now.
Yeah.
We'll just leverage, we'll take advantage of the fact that solution that used to work when things were great now doesn't work very well, and we'll try something different. We'll lower the prices. We'll lower the cost of what it is what we're doing. We'll develop our solution in a different direction.
Yeah, rethink the business model entirely. And
the beauty of this state for me has been that the proximity of Dallas and Houston and Austin and San Antonio, let alone Waco, let alone San Marcos, which is booming, let alone Lubbock being reasonably close with the universities there. The fact that there's such proximity to what is now four of the largest cities in the United States are in this region of the world. And each of these cities has a different culture, and different history and different characteristics. What's exciting about that is what it enables is diversity of thought and diversity of experience and diversity of economy, so that we can weather what we just explained. When things are really good, Texas is a state that's able to lean in on that and do something incredible about it. And when things are really bad, that's actually okay too, because we're able to recognize and address it and deal with it if we're allowed to, if we're able to, right? And that gets back to that entrepreneur's perspective that I don't really care if I'm allowed to or if I'm able to. I'm going to fix the problem,
right?
No matter what.
Interesting. When you were talking about, and really just that whole answer to those two questions you gave, I mean, ultimately it comes down to incentives, right? Businesses are going to do what the incentives that the government set, or whoever's setting the incentives, whatever makes sense.
Yes.
And when there's a problem to solve, incentives for entrepreneurs are to solve it, because you could create a business, create a whole new way of doing things.
My favorite observation about that was that I had a professor when I was in college who liked to point out that the only way crony capitalism exists is if there's a crony. And so why does crony capitalism continue to criticize the capitalism? The capitalist. Crony capitalism is not an investor or a CEO or an executive who is a bad person. It's the crony involved that's creating an incentive, participating in an incentive for bad things to take place in a capitalist economy. No crony capitalism.
Right.
You're right. And so those incentives work both ways is my point. The government can either incent workforce development and education and innovation and better communication and transparency and accountability, or it can incent teaching people the wrong things and misinformation and big companies that take advantage of people, right? At the end of the day, they are the authority. That's why they're called the authorities. They make the decision. They make the policy. They make the rule. They allow things whether they're good or bad. And I think the greater part of dissatisfaction amongst the American public these days is the simple fact that they are trying to blame us when they're the ones empowered to make the changes and make the decisions. Mm-hmm. Whatever the issue is, I don't care. Stop blaming us.
Right.
Either do something about it or get out.
Right. And they're every day taking away more and more power from the everyday American. Yeah. There's so many different ways to think about that, but yeah, it's your vote matters less than it's ever mattered in a lot of cases. There's, income inequality, that's the middle class is shrinking. And the voters are just not being represented. Our politicians have lost accountability to everyday Americans. And yeah, how can you blame, the people who you're taking away the power from?
How can you blame when you're given two parties to choose from, and that's it? I get to pick A or B. What if I don't want A or B? What if I don't like A or B? But it's your fault because you're not picking A or B. Yeah, because you're picking the wrong A or B.
Absolutely,
it's your fault. That's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous notion, and this country. Hell, the world would be better served by a bunch of people who stop buying that bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
Who stop just saying, yes, it's my fault because I don't like A or B.
Right.
No, it's maybe there are some other options that are a better idea.
No, 100%. I mean, obviously, that's what we're all about here. That's what we're working towards. And A or B make it pretty hard for the American people to have another option. They know that they're not very popular and they're not... If they were businesses, they would be bankrupt. If this was a free market and we had the Republican and Democrat LLC or whatever, they would be out of business, period.
I wouldn't be a customer.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I don't think very many people would be. And so there would be something new that would come up. But the problem is they're the ones who are making a lot of these rules and setting that structure in a way that makes it very difficult for that innovator to come up and, get shit done, like we like to say here at the Forward Party.
No, that's exactly right. And I think that's a very valid point and perhaps even a wonderful point to be wrapping up on, that everyone should merely be fighting mad, pissed off about the fact that these circumstances prevent alternatives. That's the entrepreneur brain that I've been trying to share. Mm-hmm. That in the entrepreneur mind, I don't care what the circumstances are. All I know is you're preventing me. And so I'm going to go do it anyway. Because that's ridiculous.
Right.
If you're preventing something, there must be a reason you're preventing it. And when it comes to public policy, when it comes to the government, there is no valid reason that I can come up with. There's none. There's no valid reason I can come up with for anyone in office to prevent alternatives in policy. None. We can appreciate why the government might want to get involved in preventing cigarettes.
Sure.
They're dangerous and they kill people. Yeah. I can appreciate why it's valid for the government to consider dealing with social media, even though I think their approach is wrong.
Sure.
Right. But I can appreciate why it's valid to say, oh, that's dangerous that there's misinformation there. We should do something about it. But to say that we can't have a different way of electing people, or we can't have a different way of the electoral college operating, or we can't have a different way of anything with the government. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. And therefore, something is wrong. What do we do about it? Let's change it.
Definitely. Let's change it. I think that's a great place to end on, and that's what we're working on here today. Paul, it sounds like that's what you're working on every day in some way, shape, or form, and it's been pleasure having you on today.
Thanks a lot. That's all we can do is keep working on the things that we're passionate about. So absolutely. Join us in work or join us in politics, and let's figure out how to make a difference.
Absolutely.
Good chat with you.
Paul, where can our listeners hear from you? What are your social media? Where can we hear from you?
I write a lot. I have a blog at SEO Brian. Startup Entrepreneur O'Brien, or yes, it's an old SEO thing for those of you that know search the search industry, SEObrian.com. But actually, I'm really, really easy just to find on LinkedIn or Twitter or X or Threads. I'm even on Threads if you're there. Because I do work in media tech ventures. I'm just about everywhere as much as I can be.
You are. You do a good job of that, Paul. I would definitely say you're everywhere, just about.
Thanks.
And you've been on the Texas Forward podcast, so there's check one more off your list. Cheers to that.
Good to chat with y'all.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for listening. As always, let us know how we can do this better, who you'd like us to talk to, what you'd like us to talk about, and we really appreciate you. Let's keep it going. Let's keep moving this forward party in this country forward. See you, everyone.